Sam Young.
Hi and welcome back to my booktube channel. My name is Sam and today I wanted to talk to you about all the books that I've read for my education, but primarily for university. Now, I did an English and media degree. That means I did joint honours, which is 2 different subjects that you study together. So my English degree, we read a book a week and that totaled up to be a lot of books. And as such, I've accumulated a lot of books. So you can see some of them behind me. These are just some that I brought up from the previous video that obviously I needed for this video. Go watch that if you didn't already. And then the rest of them are all tucked away in this old bedside table and it is jam-packed. So I wanted to take a chance to talk through some of the books that I read. Maybe if you're going to university and you want some ideas of some modules that you might be doing, like Gothic Literature, Contemporary Literature, all these different modules. I'll talk you through some of the books that I did when I did these modules, if you're interested in that. And also I'm going to be doing a little bit of an unhaul and kind of picking and choosing which books that I want to keep and hold on to and books that I'm ready to move on from in my life, because as much as I want to keep all the books that I've studied, there's just too many. We did a book a week. Sometimes you had 2 weeks on a book, but for the majority of the modules, it's a book a week, and that totals up to be a lot of books. And I know you can I know some people read them online and stuff, but I was very much the person of I've been given a student loan, I'm going to use that to buy books, obviously. But yeah, let's just get into the video. I'm going to quickly order all the books in the modules, and then we'll go from my first year to my 3rd and final year. So yeah, stick around. I'll leave chapter titles for the different modules maybe, if I can do that properly. But yeah, feel free to skip through if you're interested in one module over the other, but I'll try and keep everything concise and brief, because my videos keep getting longer. Anyway, let's get into the video. I'll see you there. Okay, so firstly, let's just touch base with the first 2 stages of my education. You can skip this if you want, but in secondary school, we studied 3 main books. We studied An Inspector Calls by J.B. Presley. I'm going to keep this one. I'm going to keep all of these because they're sentimental. We also studied A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and then we also studied Macbeth by Shakespeare. I love Macbeth, so good. And then in college we read a couple more books, but still not as much as university. I did both English literature and English language in college, but you only read books for English literature. I'm just showing off, you know. I'm joking. But yeah, we read Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller. Actually really good. We read some selected poetry by John Keats. We read Atonement by Ian McEwan, and we read Othello by Shakespeare, also a really good one. And then also just for some coursework I read Caroline Duffy's The World's Wife, which is really cool. It's a feminist retelling of loads of mythology and female figures within history. It's really interesting. I really like this one. But anyway, that's just a touch base to kind of give you a glimpse of my previous education. I didn't go into too much detail, but I will for university. Let's get into the books that I've read for my first course of university. So the first module that I studied at university, my very first lecture was for this, was American Literature. Now here's a brief overview of the books you may read in if you do American literature whilst you're at uni. Obviously this is all based on my experience and the books that I read, so take this with a grain of salt, but here are the books that I read for American literature. You may encounter some of these, so let's get into them and see what I think. So the first book that we read was The Narrative Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave, and then Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Now this is 2 separate books. This is just an omnibus of those 2, and this is by Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs. Now these 2 books are slave narratives. They talk about escape and also kind of living as a slave in 60s America, and they're both very heartbreaking, and I'm going to keep this one because I really enjoyed it, of learning these experiences and understanding where slave narratives came from, because there was many occasions where slave narratives were faked or obscured to protect slave routes to getting out of slavery. So it's a very interesting area of literature, and I have a particular sentiment with this book because it was the very first book we read, obviously, and I remember the night before my very first lecture, I was like, I didn't know what to expect from university, so I was like, oh my god, everyone's going to have read this, everyone's going to be so far ahead of me, I'm going to be so dumb. So I spent till like 1 a.m. reading this entire book, getting every word in, highlighting, annotating, and then I showed up to the lecture, I sat them down on the table, and everyone on that table had not read a single page of this book. It was just me that had even attempted to read the books. So that was a bit of a shock to the system. I learned that not everyone in university actually cares what they're studying about and will not read the books. So it's mostly down to you to motivate yourself to read these books and make sure you know what is going on in your lectures. I say that as if I didn't skip some of the books later on, but yeah, it's up to you to read the books and understand what the topic is. So yeah, that was a really shocking things. I expected everyone to be like really studious and that, and they hadn't even read the book. So I'm going to keep this one very interesting. The next book that we read was The Bluest Eyes by Toni Morrison. Now, this book was very impactful, very important. It has some really interesting discussions of kind of the Black identity and racism. It also handles other topics such as abuse and sexual violence, and it is a very impactful book. But for me personally, I know this is controversial, but Toni Morrison's writing style is just not one that I particularly connect with. I'm glad I read it. I think it's an important book to read, but personally, Toni Morrison isn't someone that sticks with me as a writer in her format. So I'm going to unhaul this one, and hopefully someone else can enjoy this one. I'm just realised I'm going to have to take all my sticky notes out of these. The next one you may read is The Scarlet Letter by... who's this by? This is by Nathaniel Hawthorne, a brilliant name. How did I not remember that? This one follows the life of some colonists from Britain going to the Americas, and kind of this woman who commits an affair, has a child out of wedlock, and she is branded with the letter A, and it's all about her experiences being an outcast in the society for this one act, and she's branded with the letter A that stands her out. And I actually, on hindsight, I really enjoyed it, but whilst reading it, I found it really boring. But then I finished it and I was like, oh, actually, I find this quite interesting. So I'm going to keep this one. Then the next one is a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. Now, there is one that I don't have physically. We also read poems by Emily P. Johnson, I think her name was, but I only own these ones. Now, this collection is called A Hope is a Thing with Feathers, and I love this one. You can see I hated this to death. I'm not a massive poetry person, but I just really enjoyed a lot of Emily's poems. I found them they were short, they were sweet, and they meant something. So I enjoyed these a lot more than I had expected to. They're all about death and nature and life and stuff like that. Then we read Ceremony, which is a Native American novel. It's by Leslie Marmon Silko. And I'm not gonna lie, I hated this book. I hated this book. It spends 200 pages talking about cows, and that was just it for me. I could not get past that. Well, I did get past it, but looking back, I can't believe I got past it. This follows the narrative of a Native American in, I think it was Texas, don't quote me on that, but we follow his life and the rituals that he goes through to try and find his identity within this kind of increasingly America's, like all these colonizers coming over. But yeah, it just wasn't for me. I didn't like the 200 pages about cows, and I just couldn't get connected. But yeah, I'm going to unhaul this one, unfortunately. Then we read Allen Ginsberg's Howl, but I have a collection here with other poems in. But Howl was really interesting. It was all about the American dream and the falsities around that and the hypocrisy of the American government and stuff like that. I actually really enjoyed this one more than I expected. I don't know if I'll keep it because I only like one poem from it, so I'm going to put it on the maybe pile and maybe come back to it at the end of the video, or I'll decide off screen. I'm not really 100% sure. But the other poet we studied in conjunction with Allen Ginsberg was Walt Whitman, In the Leaves of Grass. I can't really remember what this is about. Again, it is about like the founding of America and kind of the American dream. But other than that, I can't really remember what this was about. And I did not like his poems. They were way too long. So I'm going to unhaul this one. Then the final book that you might encounter on the American Literature module is Signs Preceding the End of the World by Yuri Herrera. This one, really good. It's about this girl who is travelling from an undisclosed country, but it's heavily implied to be Mexico to America. But she's traveling from one undisclosed country to a more developed country, but it turns out that it's just as kind of scary a world, and it's really interesting. And it's like this migrant story of leaving everything you know, your whole world, to go somewhere else just to be treated terribly. And it's a really good book. I'm going to keep this one. Now there is also two other poets. I have my list here. There's two poets that I missed out called Langston Hughes and Danez Smith. I didn't have their poetry with me. We were provided with them, but they were also in this module, so you might see them. So that was the first module. Okay, so the next module that I had in my first year, you do 2 modules each year. So the second one that I had was called New Horizons. Now, I don't really know how to summarize this module, but if you have it, you'll know what it is, I guess. It's been a while, but this one is, I think, basically all about new horizons in understanding literature, because a lot of the topics were about understanding author's intent and the death of the author theory, and what constitutes the beginning of a novel. Is it the title? Is it the introduction? Is it the acknowledgements? Or is it the start of the text? And it acknowledges loads of different things like that, the ending, the beginning, all these different aspects of literature, and it explores how they have been understood throughout literature. There you go, that's an explanation of the module of New Horizons. But for this book, some of the books you may encounter, or that I encountered, were these ones. Again, you can see Toni Morrison in there, so we'll get onto that in a minute. But yeah, let's go through these books. So actually, I have my list here. It says what these are for. So the first one is The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. I was not a fan of this at all. Basically, it's an epic poem. It's really long, and it's all about this muddled up crowd. There's loads of different languages used, loads of different topics, and it just wasn't for me. I got so confused. I have no idea what was going on. This was for the beginnings topic of like, where does the book begin? I'm gonna unhaul this. I hated this. Then we had Hamlet, another Shakespeare. I say I don't like Shakespeare, but all the 3 Shakespeares that I've read, I've thoroughly enjoyed. Othello, Macbeth, and Hamlet, I've thoroughly enjoyed. I think the thing with Shakespeare is reading it. I don't like it because I have dyslexia. I have no idea what's going on. But as soon as like you study it and you go through the plot and people tell you what's been happening, and then you can kind of infer what the meaning is behind it. So like you'll get told, oh, Hamlet has just killed his mother with a poison whatever, and then you're like, oh, I see why that says that now. Okay, I think that for me personally, I don't know if that's an experience universally, but for me with dyslexia, I don't like Shakespeare if I have to read it alone. I like it when I'm told what is actually happening within the scenes. But yeah, we read Hamlet for 2 weeks. This one was for the author and the death of the author theory, and the readers and the readership of a text. Now, I don't really want to explain Hamlet because it is obviously a very classic of the classics, but this is about a Danish prince, and his dad dies, his uncle marries his mum, and he doesn't like that, basically, and it ends in a bloodbath, basically. So that is Hamlet. I'm going to keep this one. I really enjoyed Hamlet. Then we studied the picture of Dorian Gray for ideology and narrative. Again, this is another book where I enjoyed it on reflection of what I'd read, but reading it, I didn't really enjoy it. It felt very pompous and over-exaggerative of like every detail. But I liked it in retrospect, and I like the vibes, okay? So I think I'm going to keep this one, maybe on a whole in the future, I don't know. But this one, if you don't know, this one, I keep forgetting to sum it up. This is by Oscar Wilde, by the way. But this one is basically a rich guy, doesn't want to age, so he puts his soul into a pitcher and then starts to regret that decision. There you go. So that's that book. Then we have our second Toni Morrison. This one is Beloved, and this one is the one that frustrated me the most with the non-linear storytelling, which I'm not a fan of. I don't like not knowing what's happening in what order, and it got really confusing, and we kept splitting between different characters, and I got lost very easily. And yeah, it was a very unfulfilling time reading this one because I didn't know what was going on. But this one basically follows the life of a woman who has to murder her child, but then the child comes back as a ghost. I think that was like the main premise of this book. I'm not gonna lie, I can't really remember. It's been like 2 years, but yeah, again, Toni Morrison, not for me. I'm going to unhaul, unfortunately. The next book you may encounter is The Bloody Chamber by, who's this by? This is by Angela Carter. We read this, oh, I didn't even say, I'm getting really bad at this. We read Beloved for the idea of me and the idea of ghosts. Bloody Chamber we read for ideas of sexual difference and queer narratives. This one is kind of a Little Red Riding retelling. And that's about all I remember about it. I'm going to unhaul this one. Angela Carter is another author that just didn't work for me. Then we read Manchester Happened, but for 2 weeks again, for racial difference and post-colonial studies. This one talks about obviously Manchester and kind of the migration of people to Manchester from where Ugandans. Okay, it followed the migration of Ugandans to Manchester and kind of the experience again between migrants there. I'm going to unhaul this one. I don't remember much about it and it has no particular connection to me, so I'm going to unhaul that. Oh, I didn't say who this one was by. This is by Jennifer McCumbine. Then the final book you may encounter is actually a graphic novel. Now, they did this on purpose because they wanted to kind of emphasize that not literature isn't purely books. Literature is comic books. Literature is graphic novels, manga, trying to think of other different books, poetry. They wanted to emphasize that there is no classism within literature. Literature is literature. So this is Swamp Thing by Alan Moore. I didn't like it. I would have preferred if we hadn't read it. We read it for 2 weeks. It was for eco-criticism and mutant. And yeah, this one basically follows Swamp Thing, which is a mutant, and he kind of comes to life, and it's all about him seeing how the earth is treated. There's also some kind of underlying DC Comics storyline because Superman and Wonder Woman just show up in this novel, which was really confusing. But yeah, this one just follows a green guy who finds out the earth isn't great, but then another green guy wants to commit eco-terrorism, so Swamp Guy has to stop him, even though the bad guy was trying to help the earth. It was very confusing. I didn't like it. I'm going to unhaul this. Okay, so now on to my second year of university. The first module of this year was called Culture and Anarchy, and as in the name, this was all about kind of cultural anarchies, basically. And here are some of the books you may encounter if you come across this module here. So let's talk through it. I think this was another kind of banger of a module. This one was quite good. So I say that starting the first book is actually one that I didn't like. This is Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. Now again, Virginia Woolf is a very popular author, but for me, I just really struggled to get into this book. It's all about this woman throwing a party and kind of everyone coming together for this party, and it's one of the first novels that takes place just in one day, so that's kind of revolutionary for being a novel set in one day specifically. And I think that really hindered the plot, because look how chunky this book is, and you're telling me one day passed. It went on for way too long, and I did not enjoy this at all. So I'm going to unhaul this one. Then we read Lady Chatterley's Lover. Now, Chatterley House is actually a real place you can visit, but this is by D.H. Lawrence, and this is one of the first eroticas. I don't know, it's definitely not the very first one, but it's one of the first ones in Britain specifically, and it was like a very scandalous. Everyone was like, oh my god. And yeah, if you're a smut girly, if you're a smut TikTok girly, then here you go. Here's a classic one for you. This one's all about a love affair between this woman and her husband, who's like wheelchair bound. He's rich, and she then falls in love with, I think it's the gardener, the groundsman, and it's this whole affair. It was quite interesting. I'm not going to lie. It's quite entertaining. And again, I'm going to put it on the maybe pile because I just don't know whether I want to keep it. I don't know whether I should keep it just because I enjoyed it. Am I ever going to read it? Probably not. Reread it? Probably not. The next one is George Orwell's 1984. Now, this one I was so excited for, and it did not disappoint. The ending kind of disappointed me, but I kind of understand why it is the way it is. But you may encounter George Orwell's 1984. This one is set in a dystopian world. This one is quite well known. It's constantly being adapted, so you probably know what it's about, but it's about this authoritarian world. Everyone's being watched, everyone's being controlled. 2 + 2 = 5, that kind of thing. And yeah, it's a very harsh, very hard world to be in, and it is reflective of where we see our own society. Although Orwell did not see where we are now, obviously he's dead, but this very much kind of predicted what we are in now, and kind of this information age of everything being monitored, everyone being watched, CCTV cameras, this new Apple thing where they're adding OpenAI to your Apple iPhone so it can see everything you ever do on it. All this kind of stuff predicted within this book, and we still let it happen. We suck. But I'm gonna keep 1989. 1984. I'm thinking of Taylor Swift. The next books you may encounter are actually two plays. I'm just going to say them together because they're both really short. But we have Shayla Delaney's A Taste of Honey. Really enjoyed this one. This is one about a lower class kind of family and the family unit. There's a mother and daughter who don't really get on very well. She marries a black man and has a mixed race child, and it's very scandalous, and yeah, it's a really interesting play. I really enjoyed this one. I'm going to keep this one. Then there was Translations by Brian Frail. This one is about Ireland and the colonisation of Ireland by Britain, and specifically the Ordnance Survey, which is basically where Britain went across Ireland and started renaming everything in understandable things for British people, and kind of removing the Irish language and the Irish identity from them. And this takes place in kind of a group of friends, a school ground group of friends who kind of vary on their ideologies about their opinions on this. Some people are like, yeah, why not let them rename everything? And some people are like, no, we can't let them do this. And some people take it a step further than that and start committing terrorist attacks, rebellion attacks, basically. So yeah, it kind of documents that, and I really enjoyed this one. It was really good again, so I'm going to keep this one. Then you may encounter another Angela Carter. This one is Nights at the Circus. I skipped this one because I don't like her writing, but this one I did start, and it's about a girl with wings. I don't know. I'm gonna unhaul this one. I didn't read it. I'm sorry. The next one is another one that I skipped over because I'd already chosen what I was doing for my essay, and this is The Buddha of Suburbia by Hanaff Qureshi. This one is very wild. I do know that one. Like, there's a lot of wildness and just, why is this happening in this book? My friend read it, and yeah, she laughed a lot about it. We read a part of it in like a Dunkin' Donuts in town, and we were just like, what is happening? But yeah, I'm gonna unhaul this one because I didn't read it. So yeah, like I said, I was very studious in the first year, and then we started slacking on the books. Just checking I didn't miss any. There was a module on the new woman, the idea of the angel of the house, I think it was called, and kind of the move away from that. There was also avant-garde poetry that obviously I don't have a copy of. We were given that. So that was everything from that module. Okay, so the next module is actually where you start to be able to choose the modules that you want to do. So for second year of university, I chose to study British women writers between the wars, obviously World War I and World War II. And that turned out to be a mistake because we ended up with a terrible lecturer who was not very nice to everyone else. But I managed to get away with a really good grade because I actually listened to her feedback. No shade to my friends. But here are the books you may encounter if you study British women writers between the World Wars. Okay, let's get into them. So the first one is Catherine Mansfield, and you read kind of a collection of her short stories. I have this very nice edition with like the gold sprayed edges, but I didn't end up liking the stories that much. They were good, they were interesting, but personally for me, not that interested. But basically these follow kind of the everyday woman in the household, and she was very much overlooked for writing meaningless stories, but actually, if you look into these stories, they're very in-depth on the female experience and understanding what women go through in the day and how women feel in the home and stuff like that. It was very interesting, but very overlooked when it was released, and she was very much pushed aside as like, oh, she's okay, but she's like, yeah, she's not as good as male writers. So that kind of makes her more important nowadays to look back and see, actually, no, she was very good at exploring the female, exploring the woman. So yeah, I'm gonna unhaul it though because I'm not gonna revisit it, but I'd recommend it. Then we read Lolly Willows, which is a witch novel, if you like. This follows an isolated woman in a town who is very much perceived to be a witch because weird things start happening when she is around, and the book does kind of lean towards a devil appearing to her, so it's kind of not 100% is she a witch, is she not, is this imaginary, is this reality? But this very much focuses on a woman that does not want to adhere to family values. She doesn't want kids, she doesn't want to live in the city and work, because this was at the time of the new woman where women were like, okay, if you're not going to have kids, you could at least like work on yourself, work on a career, and get really high. But for Lolly Willows, she was like, I don't want kids, I don't want to work myself to death. I just want to live in nature and be happy. So she was very scandalous and very looked down upon in society. So this is what that's all about. I will recommend this one. Personally, I'm not going to keep it because I didn't really like this module. So a lot of these books I'm going to get rid of. The next one you may encounter is Clash by Ellen Wilkinson. Now this is the first one in this video that is written by an MP. Ellen Wilkinson was one of the first female MPs. She did something major, she was in like a specific group as the first woman, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But yeah, she wrote this, and this is very much kind of just a love story. It's very much self-insert. The main character is very much Ellen Wilkinson herself. It's a woman in Parliament, in her local Parliament, as she goes around on this political tour, spreading Labour views and ideas of unions and stuff. I think I can't really remember. I read a good chunk of this, but then I gave up because I was like, this is really boring. So yeah, I'm gonna unhaul this one. But yeah, it was okay. Then you may encounter The Diary of a Provincial Lady by E.M. Delafield. I skipped this one, don't know what it's about. It's about a housewife's diary, I think. Don't quote me on that because I don't know. I skipped that one. Another one I skipped was Rebecca. This is so popular, and I started it and I was like, I just can't get through this. I'm not enjoying it, so I didn't. I just gave up, and it didn't help. I was not motivated about the module, so yeah, I skipped this one. Don't know what it's about. That's Rebecca Unhaul. And then the last one is Gaudy Nights. This is kind of a murder mystery set in a women-only school. I think it was at Oxford or Cambridge, one of the two. But this was basically at a time where women had to be in separate schools. They were allowed education, but they weren't allowed to be in the same educational spheres as men, and they were very much less valued. I think there was a particular point where they didn't even get a degree or something like that. See, it's been a while since I did this. I'd have to reread my notes. But there's something about women studying but then not getting a degree. And that changed, obviously. But I think it was around that time. I think that's what it was. But this is a murder mystery. Someone starts killing people and leaving poison letters around, and our main character has to find out who did it. So yeah, it's a murder mystery set in a really interesting time for women's rights in education. So there you go. I'm going to unhaul it though, because I'm never going to revisit this. So that is British women writers. I don't think I missed any. So yeah, oh, I missed Winfred Holtby. I don't know what that was about. I have her name written on my list of books from this, but Winfred Holtby, I don't know what she wrote, but we did something on her. I think probably poetry. Anyway, next year, final year, year 3. Let's go. That was not a 3, that was a 4. Year 3, let's go. Okay, on to the final 2 modules that I studied in university, the first being contemporary literature. Now this was another one that I chose, and I wish I hadn't because it was awful. I only have a couple of the books from this. I will list the ones that I've missed out because I don't have physical copies and I don't have my list on me, so I can't tell you what they were. I'll leave a list here for you to explore further, but these are the ones that I don't have physical copies of, and honestly a couple of them I skipped, so yeah, there they are. So these are the ones you might encounter on contemporary literature. Honestly, I would recommend avoiding contemporary literature. It is not a good subject. At least when I studied it, it was very, very vague and very broad and not very related to literature, if I'm gonna say myself. But these are the books that I encountered that I have physical copies of. The first one is Murakami. And this is Sputnik's Sweetheart. This one follows a woman that goes missing in Greece, and they kind of have to figure out what happened to her, at least I think. And it's very much kind of this idea of how can literature be understood when it transcends national borders. Obviously this is a Japanese novel, but it's set in Greece, set in a Greek island. So it's very much that idea of like, how does that influence how a book is perceived? How does that influence how literature is understood? This was quite good. I like it on my Japanese literature shelf, so I'm going to keep this one. So then we have Transmission by Hari Kunzuru. This one follows an Indian worker who goes over to California in America at the chance to get better work and money. But when he arrives there, he is kind of mistreated. He's taken advantage of, even though he's quite good at what he does. But basically, as revenge for this mistreatment that he gets, he creates a computer virus that then goes across the world and kind of starts causing chaos all around the world. And it's all about the transmission of this virus and how it affects different people and how this one thing can take down the entire globalization of the world, basically. And it is quite interesting, but I'm never going to reread it. And there was 3 point of views. The only one I enjoyed was the main guy, the Indian worker. The other 2 was a celebrity and someone else. And I didn't really like them. So yeah, I'm going to unhaul this one. The next one is Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. I'm butchering these names, Jesus. But this one is all about a world where doors start appearing and you can go through these doors. You could be in London, go through a door and you'd be in Shanghai. Like, they just take you wherever and you can only find out by going through them. And we follow the lives of these 2 people in a war zone. We see their country kind of fall to war and their homes get destroyed and they are forced to migrate through these doors and just end up wherever they end up, and they go to loads of different places, and it's all about this migrant experience again and just exploring how their identity is changed, how their identity is challenged throughout these different transitions and these different nations. And it's a really good book. This is really good. So yeah, I'm going to keep this one. I definitely recommend this one specifically if you want to read a book. It's really good. Then we read Exit West. This one is very much political based, and I stopped reading after the first chapter. And when he asked us if we'd read the book, a lot of people said no, and I was the only one with my hand up, and he was like, oh, what did you think? And I was like, I didn't like it. I didn't get past the first chapter. And he was like, oh, well, okay then. This lecture's not going to be very fun for you. And I was like, they never are, dude. They never are. This one is a political narrative, but also a romance, I think, between these 2 people. And I think she's a journalist writing about his political dad, or is he the politician? I'm not 100% sure. I can't remember. I'm going to unhaul this one. You can see I became such a much lazier student in the second half of studying. Then we have Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I loved this novel. This was so good. As you can see, I have the American copy because I was planning on reading it anyway, so I got it when I was in New York, and then it was on my university module reading list, so I was like, oh my god, this is cool. And thankfully I really enjoyed it. It's this dystopian world about this group of people that hang out, these group of people that have a traveling theatre and traveling music group, and they go across post-apocalyptic America and kind of perform to different places, and we see what's left of the world, but we also see how the world fell apart. We get a split timeline there. And I love this one. Really good. Definitely recommend, even if you're not studying in university, definitely check this one out. It's really cool and really interesting, and I love this American copy. Yeah, that's what this was about. So yeah, I'm going to keep this on. Then the final module that we've just completed as we finished university was Gothic Literature. Now, I didn't personally choose this module. I wanted to do nuclear literature, but it clashed and it was the uni's fault and they wouldn't fix it. So I ended up doing Gothic Literature and I'm still salty about it. But in the end, I guess it was fine. I got a first in that module specifically, so I guess it wasn't that bad. But the few books that you may encounter if you do Gothic Literature are here. Very black and white, very on theme here. But yeah, let's go through these books. A lot of them were not for me. So the first book you may encounter is The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. This is widely acknowledged to be one of the first founding books of the Gothic genre. This one follows a father and daughter and this family unit in a castle that is haunted by a giant statue. Like, the novel starts with this guy's son getting crushed by a helmet. A gigantic helmet that just comes out of nowhere and he dies from it. And there's lots of weird supernaturally events. There's a portrait that comes to life. There's a giant arm. Like, there's loads of different kind of supernatural things in this book. And alongside that, there are 2 secret father reveals, which I find really funny. It's like, no, I'm your father. That happens twice in this book, maybe even 3 times, I can't remember, but it definitely happens twice, and I just found that hilarious, because it felt very like, oh, anyone could be anyone's father at this point. I enjoyed this one. I think I'm gonna keep it, you know. I think I'm gonna keep it. Maybe I'll unhaul it, I don't know. I'm gonna keep it for now. Then we have A Sicilian Romance. I skipped this one. I just couldn't get into it. It was, yeah, I'm not interested. But this one is all about this family on an island, and they escape the island to only end up back on the island. And like there's something mysterious about the mother. I know, but I'm not gonna say because it's a spoiler. But there's something to do with the mother that happens, and yeah, it wasn't for me. I'm gonna unhaul this one. The next one is The Monk by Matthew Lewis. This is our second book written by an MP. Weird that it happened twice, but yeah. This one is by Matthew Lewis, and this one again shocked audiences because it was like, how can something so demented and weird and creepy come out of such a man in such a station that he should be like political, he should be like, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, but like they were shocked because this was so gruesome and weird that it came out of him. I read the half of this book and I gave up, and we had to do 3 blog posts in this module. We had to do 3 blog posts and then obviously the essay at the end, and I wrote about 20, there's a short story in this where someone's telling a story they did. I focused on those 20 pages and got a first. And I'm still proud of that because I have no idea what goes on in the book. I just wrote about those 20 pages specifically and was like, this character is underrepresented, fully not knowing if they showed up again. I just assumed that they didn't, and I got first, so there was that. Just bluff your way through these things. But I'm gonna unhaul this one because it was just not for me. It's all about this guy who grows up in a religious sect, and he slowly becomes a worse and worse person. He starts off pretty pure and then he starts committing different crimes, and there's this other woman that's kind of corrupting him, who we assume is working with the devil, and it's all very much about the corruption of man and how religion creates these corrupted men. So yeah, very interesting read, but I couldn't get through it and I'm gonna unhaul it. The next book was really cool, and you might encounter this one. It is The Vampire. It's so tiny. And this is by John Polidori, also known as Byron's physician. Maybe a bit more than physician if we want to point to that. But this is by John Polidori, and this is widely known as the first introduction of the vampire into specifically Western media. And this follows the kind of travels of a guy called Aubrey and his travel partner, the vampire Ruthven. And yeah, he becomes corrupted by Ruthven, and it becomes this whole kind of like, oh, he's not a very nice guy, even though everyone likes him. How has this vampire snuck into the aristocracy? And it's very much this kind of idea of like the lower class coming into the upper class during this time of class mobility. And it's really cool. I really enjoyed this one. I'm going to keep it. Then we have Elizabeth Gaskell's collection of Gothic tales. We read 3 specific ones in this. We read, or you'll read if you do this module, The Old Nurse's Story. I did a blog post on that. The Poor Claire. If I could say it right, that'd be great. And what was the last one? The Grey Woman. Not for me. Not that interesting. I'm going to unhaul that. But it's basically ghost stories, some of the first ghost stories. Specifically the Old Nurse's Story was one of my favourites of those 3. And it's about this woman and this child. They go to the child's aunt. She's like the maid. And they get haunted by a little ghost girl, which was really interesting. Then we have Sheridan Le Fanu's The In the Glass Darkly. Didn't enjoy this one. It was green tea, The Familiar, and something else. I didn't really enjoy this one. Don't remember anything about it. Gonna unhaul it. Then we have The Great God Pan. This is one I skipped. I read a bit of one of the stories. I read one of the stories. Wait, no. I was thinking this one was this one. This one has a book called Camilla in it, which is another vampire story, and I did read it. It is this famous lesbian vampire story, but although they're not really lesbians in it, it's just very sapphic coded, but in reality it's written by a man, and it's very kind of women on women hating each other and kind of being each other's villain. If there's some very interesting reviews on Goodreads specifically analysing what I just said there, of like this not really being a sapphic read, but for some reason everyone assumes it is. There's some really good Goodreads reviews on that I was reading when I was studying this one, and yeah, it really, because it could be taken as a sapphic read, but then I read those and I was like, actually I understand where they're coming from with this. So go check out the Goodreads reviews if you are a fan of Camilla. But that was in this one. I thought it was in this one. The next one is The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen. Skip this one. Not interested. It was some more short stories. By this point, I was just so done with Gothic literature. I was like, so many short stories, I just don't want to read them. Then the last one is actually Dracula by Bram Stoker. Now this is one I did for my essay, and yeah, I just read a bit of it and then focused on that. It was very slow, and I think people are misleading when they talk about how amazing Dracula is, because actually it's just a really slow book and kind of boring, if I'm gonna say. I much prefer the vampire and Camilla even to Dracula, I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, Dracula was the last book you may encounter. This, I'm not gonna explain it. Everyone knows who Dracula is. Like, come on, have you watched Hotel Transylvania? But yeah, Dracula wasn't for me. I'm gonna unhaul it. But yeah. Okay, just quickly coming back to the two maybes, I think I'm just going to unhaul Lady Chatterley's Lover and keep Allen Ginsberg. Okay, we sorted that. The last ones in this video that I want to talk about are the books that I did for my dissertation. Now, for my dissertation was, I'm so happy. It went from like it went from a high 2-2 to a low first, so I'm really happy with that one. But basically my dissertation was analysing how cats are used within translated fiction to express anxieties and consequences of capitalism. And it kind of ranged from the Meiji era of Japan to the contemporary period. There was also kind of a look at post-World War II period Japan, and it was very interesting, if I do say so myself. And here are the books that I used for it. I had a couple more, but these were the ones that ended up surviving the cut because I ended up rewriting my dissertation. But the first one is, wait, I should do these in chapter order. So the first chapter was about the Meiji era and the post-World War II era as well, and that was I Am a Cat by Soseki Natsume. This is a very infamous cat novel in Japan. It's widely known as one of the first cat novels, and it basically just follows the life of a stray cat that comes into the life of a school teacher, and it's 3 volumes long. The first volume is the most cat heavy, so I focused on that one for myself for this dissertation, but later on it kind of became, they were kind of just laughing at it as like a funny story, so the later volumes end up having more kind of cultural discussions with the school teacher and his friends rather than seeing from the cat all the time. The cat ends up dying, drowned in a barrel, I think it was. But yeah, I focused on the first volume, so I didn't have to talk about a cat dying, but that was my first chapter. I focused on this chunky beast. Then my second chapter, oh, what was my second chapter? My second chapter was the kind of contemporary use of cats, about capitalism, blah, 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 the effects on interpersonal relationships, and how those were kind of detrimentally affected by capitalism, and everyone became more individualized rather than being a community, and cats kind of reinvigorated that community spirit, and cats very much brought back that kind of outer voice rather than the capitalist individualism. Anyway, the books I focused on for that were The Guest Cat by Takashi Hirade. I read this one multiple times. I read it before, and then when it came to my dissertation, I was like, this is perfect. So yeah, The Guest Cat follows a guest cat. It's basically these 2 struggling artists living in this kind of guest house, this converted guest house, and they feel very much isolated. They're very kind of struggling, and then this cat, their neighbour's cat, comes and visits them, and they slowly build a bond, and then yeah, things happen. I should stop spoiling these books, but yeah, things happen. Really sad book, but interesting nonetheless. Then the next one is She and Her Cat, which I believe is a novelization of an anime, and this follows 4 distinct short stories focusing on women and their interactions with stray cats, or their own cats, or their neighbours' cats and stuff like that, and how these cats influence their lives. Like, there's one about a depressed woman, and this kitten comes into her life and completely changes that, and it's very sweet, very cute, and I focused on this one for my dissertation. Obviously, that's why I'm talking about it. Also, look how cute the cat is. So that's the next book. I'm keeping all of these books, by the way. They all go on my translated Japanese fiction shelf. Then the final chapter I did focused on kind of the supernatural and spiritual elements of these cats, and how ideas of the Maneki Neko figure, which is the waving cat, you're probably familiar with that, and how that kind of played into this dissection and this discussion of how cats talked about capitalism. And the two books that I used for that were If Cats Disappeared from the World, which is about a man who is diagnosed with a brain tumour and told he's going to die, but then the devil appears to him one night and it's like, if you agree to get rid of one item from the world completely, such as mobile phones, movies, and ultimately cats, I'll give you an extra day of life for each one. So it's kind of that discussion of what is useful to humanity, what do we need to live, and what we are not willing to give up for an extra day of life. That's selfishness. Really interesting. We're going to keep it, obviously. The next one is The Cat Who Saved Books. This one is about a young boy who owned a bookshop with his grandfather, but then when his grandfather passes away, he becomes extremely depressed, obviously, and he becomes a hikikomori, I think it was, which is basically a hermit in Japanese. And then this talking cat appears to him and kind of reinvigorates his life and takes him on magical journeys to explore why books are important and why he should carry on his grandfather's legacy, and not just give up and become a hermit, basically. And it's really cute. And then the final one was not like a book I wrote about, but it was a source that I used, and that was The Land of the Rising Cat, which is basically this big book that just talks about all the different iterations of cats within Japanese culture and all the different ways that they appear and are used within art, within culture, within religion and destinations. Like, it just goes into everything, and I found this really useful. But yeah, they were the books I read for my dissertation. Obviously, I read a lot more like academic sources as well, but no one's interested in them. So yeah, they're all the books that I read for university. Obviously, there were some missing that I didn't have physically, but I'm so happy to have all these ones ready to unhaul. I'm just going to move the camera. It's going to be easier than lifting them. But I'm so excited to be getting rid of all of these books now. All of these books can go. That's the video. I unhauled the books. I hope you found that interesting. I tried to be informative, but I don't know how well I was at succeeding at that. But I hope it gave you an idea of what kind of things you can study at university, what these modules entail, and what books you may encounter in your university degree if you decide to do English, which I highly recommend. You should do English. It's completely useless, so maybe do a joint honours with media or something like that as well. That's what I did. But definitely recommend English as a module, and I hope this video was helpful and it gave you some ideas what you might study, what books you may come across, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Just a little update on the classics that I did keep. Here's the shelf with them all on. I did decide to keep transmission. But yeah, here are them all. I already had those down here, and obviously those from the previous video. But here are the ones that you just saw. And yeah, they all fit on one shelf now. So there we go. And there's all my bookmarks. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. This is going to be my last Unhaul video for a while. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Leave a like, comment and subscribe. Let me know about the books that you studied in school. Did you read any of these ones? Did you have any differing opinions on these books than I did? Did you study any of the same modules? Let me know everything down below. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!